Today, as Lorna has explained, I want to talk to you about placing portraits, and I want you to think about those two words. They're on the screen for you, placing portraits. This is a brand new talk that I'm delivering to you today, and when I was asked to prepare something, it gave me an opportunity which one doesn't give oneself, and that is to actually reflect on one's own practice as an artist. As you heard from the introduction, a lot of the time I am focusing on other Welsh artists and enjoying that experience. But the focus today will be myself as a creator in my own right. All three images on the screen there I've produced over 3 decades. Inevitably though, because I'm going really from the mid-80s to the present, I will talk about myself as a curator, and in a sense it's difficult to separate those two selves. Placing portraits, then, is a personal view. I need to say that at the outset. But I think, as a way in for you, we need to think about a dictionary definition of what is a portrait. What else would one do in a library but go to the dictionary? So, a likeness of a person or of an animal, interesting, made by drawing, painting, photography, sculpture, etc. So the kind of key word there for portrait, the second of our words, is likeness. I'd immediately add a PS, and that is that I would argue, speaking as artist as well as art historian and curator, that a good portrait is more than a likeness. It has to be about more than that. It can't be about likeness alone. So the other little word there, a little word I think with a lot of meaning, is placing. And it's an energized word by using that form. Not placed, but placing. So what do I mean by that? And hopefully over the next 20 slides after this one, that will unfold. But to give you some pointers, first of all, placing is really about, do we place the person? Do we recognize who we're looking at in an image, or perhaps even when we're meeting people in the street? Already Lorna's identified one of the sitters for you. Do we recognise the person in the middle? Do we recognise all the people in the image on the left from the 1980s? So placing as identification, as recognition. It's a very human thing. Do we recognise ourselves, each other? Placing as a secondary meaning would be the placing of a portrait within the picture frame, given that it might be a painting. Of course, it may be another medium. But where in that rectangle, we work with the convention of rectangles, don't we? Where do you place the portrait within that frame? And the placing, the positioning, gives different meanings according to what you decide. The third thing to consider with placing portraits is the physical location. Artists make objects. Paintings are objects. They're not just surfaces that you can be transported to somewhere else by looking at. Where does the physical object reside? Does it reside in a national library, in someone's home, or somewhere else? And the fourth kind of way to think about placing, I think, is what in a sense we've already started to do, and that is contextualizing the portrait. A portrait generally exists in time, it exists in place. Maybe there are time and place elements happening within the artwork itself. So there's a kind of time capsule. Perhaps at first glance the image on the left shows that most of all. But there's also, where do we place the portrait in terms of our own history of art, our own history of society? So over 25 years, from the mid-80s and into the 90s and the 2000s, I have been producing work. We have a watercolour, which on the left, that was exhibited at the National Eisteddfod in Lampeter in 1984. A large oil painting in the middle, which I exhibited at the National Museum and the National Assembly. So we moved to Cardiff, and the image on the right, as we know, is here at the National Library. So what I'm going to do now is take you, the navigation, if you like, through this is across time. So if I can take you back to 1984. In 1984, the National Eisteddfod was in Lampeter, and the announcement was would artists like to contribute images that were a cartoon of Wales? And this is what I came up with, and this is what was exhibited. Wales on its side, as you can see. Bang in the middle, you can probably see the National Library building. At this time, I was producing work towards my master's here in Aberystwyth, so Aber was important to me, so I wanted to see Wales side on, as some people might call it. Certainly a cartographer would not present Wales that way. I think you can appreciate immediately that the image is teeming, but I want to just pull out a few features. The first feature is politics, and that's identified really with this image bottom left. And then moving across the bottom of the screen, the next kind of area I wish to explore is sport. The third one is music, and the last one is art and language. So to go back to the first one, in 1984, Nicholas Edwards was Secretary of State for Wales, and there you see him sat on top of the Welsh office saying, "I'm the king of the castle." 1984. And Neil Kinnock on one side of the Severn Bridge and David Owen on the other side of the Severn Bridge, and they're sort of pondering two sons of Wales. So, you know, there was very much a debate going on then as there was now. And of course, David Owen is nearer to England. He's on the English side of the bridge. Sport, I would argue that the major rugby player of the day was Terry Holmes, scrum half, and you see him there as well. So we're now identifying people. We also have the three snooker players of the day, major Welsh figures on the international snooker scene, Terry Griffiths, Ray Reid and Doug Mountjoy. And image 3, the detailed number 3, we have Mr. Speaker, representing sort of music and voice, shouting order. He was, after all, Mr. Speaker in the House of Commons. But of course I'm using that word order perhaps to mean other things as well. There's a reference to Welsh choirs singing We'll Keep a Welcome. And in a sense, the voice and the word is implicit via the sign for the National Eisteddfod in Lampeter and a glimpse of the National Library, which takes us on to the final theme on the right that I wish to explore, and that is, if I can sum it up really, is art and language. So on the side of the cliff, I've said it's Tunney's Cliff. I'm sure you'll get the reference. Ynys Môn is personified as Mam Cymru, and I've invented a Tad Cymru who is busy paddling his coracle off to Brittany. So it's interesting to sort of revisit the 1980s. This is the first time I've done this since producing the image, really, and I'm doing it with you. But of course, other people were producing portraits in that decade, and I need to now identify myself, placing portraits, identify myself as the son of Robert Thomas, who produced the Aneurin Bevan statue in Cardiff. So again, a work produced in the 1980s. He was born in what was clearly not an auspicious year for Wales, 1926 in the Rhondda, the year of the general strike, and produced the first and, as far as I know, only portrait statue of Aneurin Bevan in the world. Bevan, of course, son of a coal miner, as my father was, and architect of the National Health Service. Bear in mind the kind of political Wales that was the 1980s. I've referred already to Nicholas Edwards. So we have this statue unveiled in essentially a 1980s Wales, if I can put it that way, by the leader of the opposition, Michael Foot, in 1987. So I suppose it was a political act as well when the Bevan statue was unveiled. But really it was about the individual, about the man. And this brings me back to one of those other meanings of portrait, and that is locating a portrait. It was a conscious decision to place the Bevan statue in Queen Street, amongst the people, if you like, the people of Wales in the capital city, and not nearby in front of the museum, where you had the elite, statues of the elite, and on the edge of that group was the statue of David Lloyd George. And I show you a detail ahead, the head of that statue by Michael Rizzello, which is also in the exhibition up in the Gregynnog Gallery at the moment. So the plan then was to place Bevan amongst the people in the act of his speaking, Bevan the orator. That was the west end of Queen Street, Cardiff. But the plan for the east end of Queen Street, which was discussed but never came about, was to put a second statue to Jim Griffiths. In the event, it took until 2005 for an alternative Robert Thomas sculpture to go at the east end of Queen Street. I won't tell you what it is. You may know, and there's a whole series of works along the road.